Oh, okay. Now it's working. There we go. I think it's working now.
What's it doing to work?
It's videotaping.
What's it doing?
It's a camera. It's video camera.
Oh, video.
Yeah, with sound. That's the way cameras have gone these days. This is a digital video camera.
So, but I mean, it's moving?
Mm-hmm.
Ah. So.
So, if you don't mind, so you said you got this book, this patent book, and so you're
Yeah, Captain's Third Army. This is my. Doesn't have too much on Pilsen, but it does have each of the individual campaigns, major campaigns. But it's well, his technique really reduced the time because World War I was in the trenches and nothing moved. Well, it slowly moved, but with Patton's outfit moving, he used fuel so fast they had to start a special fuel run from the port Le Havre in to catch up with him and refuel. Because he had half tracks and tanks, and but there was walking troops too, foot soldiers. I mean, involved in all of the campaigns. But his armored thrust reduced the time it took to subdue the people in each of the cities. And otherwise it would have been a couple years longer, or been longer than it was. And his campaigns, there were blocks, and the Germans broke through Christmas or January of one of the winters, and they got into the second stage of the supply before the troops caught up with him and managed to quell the thrust. But there were some fallbacks. But he did his campaign and techniques did much of the battle. Of course, as you know, the Russians got into it, so they were coming in from the east. Coming around Czechoslovakia, getting on the backside.
Yeah,
And
you started to say before I turned the camera on that you.
Yeah, we went through
Did
Nuremberg about 5 June it was, I guess it was, 4 June. Nuremberg was Germany's main headquarters, and the Allies told the Germans we were going to bomb Nuremberg to get out. They warned them ahead of time there were going to be a 1,000-plane raid on Nuremberg. And the people wouldn't leave. Supposedly they didn't leave. So here's a city of a couple 100,000 people, and 2 1,000-plane raids reduced the city, about half of it, to rubble, and killed people in their homes. They stayed in their homes. So we got there after this happened, our unit, going toward Czechoslovakia. But I walked through Nuremberg, and it was decimated. You could hardly get a Jeep to drive through some of the streets because the buildings were just collapsed. And your mother and I walked through Nuremberg when we traveled in Europe, the recovered Nuremberg.
Yeah.
The Hohenzollern Castle was 1,000-year-old castle, and we walked through the castle. It was damaged, but not completely, with the 1,000-plane raids. But the German youth had had a rally in one of the big buildings, and it was bombed, and I don't know how many hundreds of youths were killed. But they weren't going to leave the city, so our bombers took care of it. And then we went on through to our unit when I didn't have a lot of fighting. We got to Pilsen the 6th of May. War was over the 8th of May, and we backed up to Marienbad, I guess it was, in Czechoslovakia, which was an open city. There were a lot of hotels, and there was the hospitals, and it was an open city for Germans and Americans both. And then we moved into Pilsen and formed the 22nd Corps, which we had the 16th Armored and 2 infantry divisions. Most of them were down in Austria. And I was in, by then, communications. I think I had corporal, technician, 5th grade, big, big deal. And we found a German encampment, which was winterized buildings with heat, and we were going to stay there for the winter. And we set up our communications cables and down into Austria, so we didn't have to run check wires when you couldn't get a telephone going. Had 5-pair cable, rubber 5-pair cable, and so that's where we were going to be for the winter as occupation forces. We wanted to go on to Prague, but we stopped at Pilsen, and the Third Army was told by United Forces, no further, don't go any further east. And so we were there as occupying force of troops. And 2 German divisions surrendered, and they came to our unit, and we had piles of weapons, and they had, I don't know, 20 or 30, 40 women who were camp followers with them. And our GIs had to strip everybody. And one man came into a real latrine where I was. He says, I never thought I'd get tired of looking at naked women. Because they had knives taped between their breasts and their rear end. They had to strip them completely, the camp followers. And so after things settled down, we were getting ready to be there for the winter. And October, November, I guess it was November, we had Thanksgiving dinner, and our general said, we have been given instructions to clear out of Czechoslovakia by the last day of November. We said, oh no. We got all of our cable in line and everything, all of our telephones. So we had to pack up. So all the troops got out. We packed up our telephone equipment, we put them into Dodge 3/4-ton trucks. We had about 6 or 8 of them. I had one. I was the last one out of the motor pool about 8 o'clock at night. And I crossed the DMZ back into Germany, and still within the zone time. We ended up in a artificial what do I want to say, rayon or synthetic rayon plant, which was unoccupied, but it was gave us quarters. So we had quarters set up in Germany, and we had telephone trucks, about a dozen telephone trucks. So we turned them in, went across Germany to France, to Thionville, and turned them in, and came back. This is in winter. Came back through occupied Germany by the French, a part of it. Well, Yeah, we needed a place to stay. So we turned off of the highway into the town and went to a bar and asked, what we had was a 6x truck with the drivers of all the telephone trucks that turned in. So about a dozen or 15 drivers. I was one of the drivers. And the people at the bar said, yeah, there's some Americans across the street in a house. You know, this is the French zone. We're Americans. We went and knocked on the door. There was a master sergeant and a major with him. We said, we need a place to sleep for the night. Well, he said, we don't have heat, but we got floors. So we went in and slept on the floors. And I thought how interesting that was. We've got an occupied observers, American, in the French zone. Because the question was, were the French going to rise up? About half of them were sympathetic with the Germans, and we weren't certain but what they would cause a revolution. So I think we had people there to monitor what was going on, because the bar that we stopped at had about 12 or 15 French soldiers. So anyhow, we slept the night there, managed to get in our trucks back on the highway and back to our synthetic rayon plant. That's what it was. And so they said, Ellison, you've got orders for 3rd Army Munich. So I signed out a Jeep and got on the Autobahn. That was the first Autobahn that anybody had. And I 60 miles an hour down to Munich. Munich was 3rd Army. I walked into 3rd Army where they had telephone switchboards connected, because that's all we had to operate with. And I talked to the lieutenant, and I says, I'm Corporal Ellison reporting. And he says, yeah, here are your orders, get in the Jeep and drive back to Nuremberg. I'd gone, drive to Nuremberg. Yeah. Where we were staying was near Nuremberg. So he says, here are your orders, drive to Nuremberg. Okay, but I got in the Jeep and drove 75 miles, 100 miles up to Nuremberg and reported in to the sergeant. There were always sergeants, you know, sergeant. And yes, we had 2 telephone trucks back to back. And what they had set up was communications, direct line to France, Paris, London, Zurich, Switzerland, Moscow, and the war trials were starting. So we operated the switchboards for the war trials. That was January, February, March, April, 46. And we had quarters overlooking the prison where they kept the 10 or 12 Germans that were on trial. And I have a picture someplace with the picture that your mother mailed to me, a picture of Ann, and I had it up on the wall over my bed. I've got that someplace, and I don't know if it's here or not, at any rate. So we were operating the switchboard, and it was good duty. I got in for a couple of the trials. The visitor gallery was maybe no more, maybe 30, 10, 10, 10, something like that. Very small. So I got to watch some of the trials I missed my lunch, that's all right. But I got to watch the trials. So I signed out April, must have been April, yeah, middle of April. They told me when my time was up. The way of getting people home was very, very neat. Everybody had a time of occupation or overseas away from America. And the ones who'd been in Africa and across to Sicily, and up the boot and stuff, they had like 150 points. So the first cutoff was like 120 points. So the guys with 130, 140 points who'd been over there a year, 15 months, got home right away.
Mm-hmm.
The next cutoff was 80 points, which about like 4 months or 5 months later. And so old Ish had 40 points. So I knew I'll be here for the occupation. I wasn't shot at, I was well. And so I worked at the war trials till maybe March, and then we had an occupation unit that interfaced with the Germans against the Russians in the Russian zone. And so I went to this town, I forget the name of it, and I was working switchboard communications, and I went out to the each of the guardhouses where the Germans were, and what they did, we let the Germans move up to the front and we stood behind them, and we're guarding. So I was there for 2 or 3 months, March, April, and then about the second or third week in April, we got orders finally to move home. So we went up to, oh shoot, not Berlin, maybe it was Berlin, and to the airport, and where they mustered us out, and we went from there to the port. There was a German port there, and got aboard a K3 cargo ship. We had about 800 or 1,000 on it, I guess, and they'd welded bugs into the compartments, and so we came home on a Victory ship, 20 knots.
Mm-hmm.
We made it in 8 days into New York, and that was 4th or 5th of May, and I'd gone in the service 8th of May, and I got back, I think, the 6th of May. So it was 2 days short of 3 years exactly when I got out in 46. And so with that 3 years of service, we got each month you got a month of education. So that gave me enough months to finish Tri-State well.
Mm-hmm.
I'd written to Ann, and Dad was in Norfolk at the naval base as a chaplain. He married us in Norfolk, and we went off to Angola for me to finish my bachelor's degree. But I wasn't shot at, and I was well, and so it was quite a war experience, and that got me back home. But I wasn't, as I say, I wasn't shot at, and I was well, so I said, I'll get home when I get home. There's no sense to be frustrated if something you can't control.
Yeah, well, tell me, marching across Europe with Patton's Command Corps.
If what?
How long did it take you to march across Europe in Patton's Command Corps?
Took us, we got over there in January. We left January, February, March or April, May. March, I guess we were in a chateau in France. We started in March, middle of March. And we our division drove through, most of it was captured or occupied Germany. We stopped a couple of times. As I say, we got to Nuremberg,